Miles Mikolas only got to throw 62 pitches on Wednesday, but it might have been the perfect amount as the Cardinals salvage a game in Houston. Coming up on Be Schaeffer Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of Be Schaeffer Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you, late evening hours of Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. Cardinals get a win in Houston, once again avoiding a sweep on this road trip. It happened in Philly on the Sunday night baseball game, and it happens Wednesday afternoon as the Cardinals beat the Astros 4-2 behind a solid outing by Miles Mikolas that was cut short after only 62 pitches. Was that a decision by Oli Marmol that we should be scrutinizing, or was it exactly the right thing for a Cardinal team that really needed a win, and Oli managed pretty aggressively using his bullpen, which was able to make it happen, recording the final 9 outs of the game with the Triumvirate, as the Cardinals were able to salvage one game in this series. We'll talk about the Mikolas outing, the relatively quick hook by Oli Marmol, but why I don't think it was even a question for the Cardinals manager to approach it the way that he did and ensure that the Cardinals did not let this one slip away, as now they get a chance to come back home. Long homestand, 4 games against the Rockies, 3 against the Pirates. Some winnable games against some perhaps beatable teams coming up this week, as the Cardinals look to not only hang in there in the NL Central standings as they've been doing in recent days, but maybe make a bit of a charge against a more friendly portion of their schedule. Appreciate you guys being here and tuning into this episode. If you like Cardinals podcasts and videos, click subscribe on the channel. We're here covering every angle of the St. Louis Cardinals on a daily basis all season long, and the offseason too. We'll be here. And if you're already a subscriber to the channel and you'd like to support my work on another level, you can check out the channel memberships. The link is in the description if you'd like to become a member of the channel. There's also the Be Schaeffer Daily podcast feed on Spotify if you want to give us a follow over there too. Let's go ahead, though, and get into some Cardinals talk here as Miles Mikolas put together another solid start for the Cardinals this afternoon. And the reason I say another, and look, I know the ERA is not very sunshine and roses for Miles Mikolas, but his numbers of late have actually been pretty good if you consider the consistency that he's brought to the table and the number of times that he's just been able to keep the Cardinals in games and give them a genuine chance to win. I know that that doesn't necessarily track with being a number 2 in the Cardinals rotation, as I think coming into the year that was going to be the expectation behind Sonny Gray as the club's ace. And then when Gray went down, Mikolas was your opening day starter. So there were expectations attached to that. And when you look up and see after today's game, he goes 6 innings and gives up 2 runs. He still has a 5.32 ERA. It seems a little bit weird to be singing his praises. However, I think if you allow yourself to lower those expectations a little bit, which I'm well aware that Cardinals fans have long since done regarding Miles Mikolas, because I read the YouTube comments and see that most people don't have a ton of faith in him, and there's maybe frustration that Mozeliak didn't go out and get a legit number 2, maybe a 1B to Sonny Gray's 1A in the offseason, and decided instead to kind of grab guys that you would see penciling in toward the back of the rotation, like Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, although Kyle Gibson has certainly exceeded expectations and might honestly be your number 2 in this rotation at this point in time, but we'll see how that gets sustained over the course of the long season. But I think people with Mikolas, there's the set of expectations that come with you're the opening day starter, and then the numbers that he's put together, and that certainly was the case throughout the bulk of the month of April, and obviously the start that he had back in late March to begin the season against the Dodgers. Like Mikolas, those numbers just don't line up with the expectations, and the contract that they signed him, the extension, just not really lining up with what Cardinals fans were hoping to get from Miles Mikolas and what the team was hoping to get from him as well, to be quite honest. But with the start that he had today, going 6 innings, allowing 2 runs, he's now had a run dating back to his last start of the month of April, where really his last 8 starts, 7 of them have given the Cardinals a really legitimate chance to win the game. Now, ultimately, the Cardinals are only 5-3 during that stretch rather than 7-1. Giving the team a chance to win doesn't mean they're going to win. The offense is going to have to do its job as well. But really, May 7th was the only outing that Mikolas has had over his previous 8 that was just a dud. 4 innings, gave up 6 runs against the Mets. Did not really give the Cardinals a chance to win. But going back to April 26th, 5 2/3, 2 runs, 6 innings, 3 runs, 6 innings, 3 runs, 5 innings, 1 run, 6 innings, 3 runs, 6 innings, 3 runs, and today, 6 innings, 2 runs. Those are the other 7 with that 4-inning, 6-run outing sandwiched somewhere there in the middle. That's quality starts or better, essentially, every time that Miles Mikolas has pitched but the one, going all the way back to April 26th. Now, that game was a 5 2/3, 2 runs, so he falls 1 out short of quality start being 6 innings, 3 earned runs. But I think you'd rather have 5 2/3 and 2 because that's a run saved and 1 out short of an actual quality start. That's right in line with being able to give the Cardinals a legit chance to win. The other one was 5 innings, 1 run, that he obviously didn't go the 6th inning in that game against Boston, but only allowed 2 hits in that game, 1 walk, and pitched quite well, and the Cardinals did end up winning that game. So Miles Mikolas, yes, I think the reason it's not I think, it definitely is, the reason his ERA doesn't get trimmed down a little more quickly is because a lot of his starts are just barely on the qualification standards for what a quality start is. 6 innings, 3 earned runs. So when your ERA is in the 6s, as Miles Mikolas had there late in April before his April 26th start brought it back down. And honestly, it went back up above 6 during this stretch because of the one game that was a real clunker for him on May 7th, 4 innings, 6 runs. His ERA ballooned back up to 6.43, and over the past 5 starts now, he's been trimming it back down slowly but surely. It's gone down little by little each game. But when you're on a pace for most of your starts, because Mikolas has had, over that stretch, 4 of his 8 starts going exactly 6 innings and allowing exactly 3 runs, just the quality start merchant as it's been, it's not going to lower your ERA too much because that's a pace of a 4.50 ERA. So he's been going from 6.43 to 6.19 to 5.77, 5.64, 5.54, and then today's start a little bit better, down to 5.32. As I've said on previous B-Shaped Daily podcasts in the last month or so, as Mikolas has sort of been ticking his way toward respectability, this is going to be what the ERA probably looks like for him at the end of the year. It's going to be around 4.8, 4.9, 5.0, because it's going to be difficult when you don't have too many of those. Like, we're not seeing an 8-inning, 0-run outing from Miles Mikolas right now. Maybe it comes at some point, but when your better outings are 6-3, 6-2, those individual games do give the Cardinals a chance to win. It just doesn't do a whole lot for his season-long ERA. So when you look up and see 5.32 ERA for Miles Mikolas, I do think he's been better than that when you isolate it to the last 8 starts, which is not just me saying, oh, ignore the stuff that was terrible from him and look at the stuff that's good. I mean, when you take an 8-start sample and 7 of the 8, he's giving you a real chance to win, you take that. Now, you don't take that at a level of a number 2 starter, and I understand that criticism. He's more like a number 3, maybe even a high-end number 4, but it's a lot better than what it was in April for him when he was looking absolutely non-competitive, had 3 of his first 5 starts in which he allowed 5 earned runs. It was looking for a while like Miles Mikolas was not going to even be a tenable option in the Cardinals rotation for the rest of this season, let alone the rest of his contract, which also includes 2025 at this point after the Cardinals extended him at the beginning of last year in spring training. So for Mikolas to kind of turn the corner the way that he has over the past month and a half, really at this point, month plus, it's really encouraging just to think that the Cardinals are getting a chance to win when he goes out there every 5 days. It's a low bar. I think a lot of people are going to comment and say, well, why are we asking so little, demanding so little of the standards that should be for this Cardinals organization? It's just where they are, folks. And I understand that a lot of people feel like, well, everybody's just going crazy and throwing a party when they get back to 500, and that's not really the standard. It used to be Bill DeWitt when he fired Mike Matheny, or was speaking after the press conference that fired Mike Matheny, saying that in this town, 500 baseball is just not good enough, not for this town, not for these fans, and not for this organization. So I understand the frustration from Cardinals fans when we think about where we've gotten to since then in the 6 years since Matheny was fired, that now reaching 500 is like the pinnacle of the season so far to this point, and the Cardinals are still kind of scuffling around a little bit below that after this road trip in which they reached that 500 mark on the road trip, and then later on in the trip, they played at Philly, played at Houston, and didn't win either of those series. Now, they weren't swept in either of those series. That's not something to celebrate necessarily, but I think when we talked about it on the big show on KTGR earlier today, we framed it appropriately, and the question was, are you satisfied by the road trip? And we said, no, not really. I don't think the Cardinals should be satisfied by going 4-5 on a road trip. However, I think it's tolerable. I think it's tolerable as long as the Cardinals now are going to turn around and do damage against the types of teams that they should be able to beat up on. You have to hold them to that standard at this point. But they weathered the storm on this road trip is what I would say. Because you go to Cincinnati, you lose that first game after the grueling travel from the previous Sunday night baseball game in St. Louis. The Cubs were in town. They had the rain delay. It was a whole thing. Played on Memorial Day Monday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said that travel schedule, they didn't get into Cincy until like 4 in the morning, probably didn't get settled in until 5 a.m., and then they had to turn around and play at 3 p.m. The offense was sluggish that day, as you guys recall, and so they lost that game. But they won the next two in Cincy to be able to get back to a 500 record. But then we've seen them lose 4 of their last 6, essentially, coming back to St. Louis now for Thursday's series opener against the Rockies. And it's putting right back to that just barely below 500 mark. The Cubs have surpassed them. The Cubs won on a walk-off tonight against the White Sox, so the Cardinals have a little bit of ground yet to make up against Chicago. They weren't able to gain a game on them today because they won, as did the Cardinals. But my point with all of this is I don't think anybody should be thrilled about the way the road trip went, but the Cardinals did just enough to make sure that they didn't have a major backslide into a very dangerous territory right after reaching the pinnacle of their season and climbing that ladder and getting up to 500. Nobody kicked the ladder out from under them, as could have very easily happened if you get swept by either Houston or Philadelphia. Suddenly that would have amounted to a 5 out of 6 game losing stretch that would have put the Cardinals well behind the 8 ball once again. Right now, I think at least at 2 games under, going into a stretch of the schedule that they should really be able to take advantage of, you could see them coming out of this homestand even with a plus 500 record if they're able to go 5-2 over the 7 games coming up against the Rockies and the Pirates, which honestly, if we're going to grade this upcoming homestand, 4-5 was not satisfying on the road trip, but it was tolerable. They weathered the storm is the way I would phrase it, because look, it can be a difficult thing to climb the mountain. When you dig yourself a hole, you dig all the way out of it, very easily can be kicked back down into that hole when you start to play against some better teams. And I know the Astros have a worse record than the Cardinals, but I also think that they're not going to be in that situation for long. And the teams that are occupying the AL wildcard spots right now better not get too comfortable, because I think teams like the Astros and like the Rangers and Blue Jays and others could be climbing up into that conversation before it's all said and done. And we know the Phillies are one of the best teams in baseball, if not the best team, and they handled the Cardinals 2 out of 3. So to be able to weather that storm, it's tolerable. But it's only tolerable if you then raise the expectations for these upcoming games against the Rockies and against the Pirates, which I would say 4 out of 7 for this homestand would be passable. I don't know that it would be satisfying. 5 out of 7 I think you'd be satisfied by, and that would get the Cardinals to a record above 500 if they can get 5 of the next 7. And you might be saying, look, Brenden, they're below 500. Let's not put the cart before the horse on expecting to suddenly rattle off 5 out of 7. But I think if you look at the opponents and the fact that you are playing at home, you should be able to defend home territory. That should almost be the expectation for the Cardinals in this homestand. So if you don't like me talking about 4-5 on the road trip as being tolerable and being, almost acceptable, again, not maybe acceptable, but tolerable, you can tolerate it, then don't forget to hear that I'm saying, look, 5 out of 7 here should be the expectation when you're playing some lesser teams at home and a chance to really make up some ground in the standings. 4 out of 7, if they just win the homestand, squeak by, would be, maybe that would be tolerable. I would also call it passable. But 5 out of 7 should be the expectation. And if you're really going to be satisfied by this upcoming stretch, I think you need to take 3 or 4 from the Rockies and then maybe take 2 or 3 from the Pirates. Could be a little bit more difficult to do it, considering coming into the series, you did spend your triumvirate on Wednesday. The entire back end of the Cardinals bullpen, the guys that pitched 7, 8, and 9 in every game that they win, it seems like. Andrew Kittredge, JoJo Romero, and Ryan Helsley, not necessarily in that order. Those are the guys that got it done after Miles Mikolas on Wednesday. And look, they were all available. They were all rested in that they didn't pitch the day before. Helsley hadn't pitched in several days. JoJo and Kittredge obviously were part of that game one that the Cardinals ultimately lost in Houston when Romero broke down, but were able to get it back on the horse on Wednesday. The seventh inning from JoJo was clean. The eighth inning from Kittredge, the same, and Ryan Helsley looked back in the ninth when he was throwing the fastball and spotting it up where he needed to. Really nice sequence to John Singleton with two fastballs at 100 miles per hour at the top of the zone, and then a curveball to finish him off and end the game with the strikeout. That's sort of the Ryan Helsley that we're used to seeing, and I think he's getting more and more comfortable again using that fastball and having confidence in the command of it, which is just going to make him all the more effective because the slider is an absolute weapon for him. But you also want to be able to spot the fastball and then the slider and curveball off of that pitch, and I think that was a step in the right direction from Helsley on Wednesday. But the reality is, because you used all three of them, and maybe you didn't necessarily need to, does that put the Cardinals in a little bit of a bind coming into the Rockies series? Well, my thought, in the way that Oli Marmol clearly thought about it, and we'll listen to him with some audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, is that it just wasn't even a thought on the mind, on the radar, to send Miles Mikolas back out for the seventh inning, despite that he had only thrown 62 pitches and conceivably would have been able to stay out there. The two runs that Mikolas had given up to this point, this is key, and I think the decision, and why for Oli, there was no question about the way that he would go about this. The two guys that had homered off of Mikolas in back-to-back moments earlier in the game, Yainer Diaz, who I think he homered in all three games of the series. He really got the Cardinals' number in this week. And then it was Trey Cabbage, back-to-back, homering off of Miles Mikolas in the fifth inning in this game. So when the lineup is due to turn back around there for the seventh inning, it's JoJo Romero's spot, as I think it was the lefty Singleton with the righty Diaz mixed in between another lefty in Trey Cabbage. Yesterday it was Spaghetti. I got through the whole episode of B-Shape Daily yesterday, by the way, calling Spencer Arrighetti Spaghetti, whether I said Spencer Spaghetti or Freddie Spaghetti or whatever I said. I did it with a straight face the whole time and didn't allude to the fact that I was doing it. So I don't know if anybody even noticed that, but I decided to play it straight, and it was funny to me. So anyway, now we've got Cabbage that's making an impact as we continue the food-related talk in this Cardinals-Astros series. But Diaz and Cabbage went yard against Mikolas in the fifth. Fastball for Yainer Diaz hit the opposite way. And for Cabbage, it was just one of the worst sliders, man. And I sent this tweet out, and I understand that it's not possible to do what I suggested Miles Mikolas should consider doing, which is to just never throw a slider again, because it seems like every time he just leaves a flat one in the zone, it gets punished. And he throws the pitch. I looked at on StatCast after. I'm like, I know he throws this pitch all the time. It's like 24%. So he throws a lot of sliders. Some of them are not nearly as bad as the ones that get hit a long, long way. But when he makes a mistake on it, it is just such a flat pitch. And the curveball as well is like he puts it on a platter almost. His pitching motion, when the curveball doesn't snap off, something about it lets it hang in the air for infinity, it seems like. And I know that like hanging curveballs are hangers for a reason, but something about the way Miles Mikolas delivers one, it just looks like it's on a tee and it's a beach ball for the batters. And that's what the slider to Cabbage was. But we know this about Miles Mikolas. Even when he pitches well, he is going to have at least one pitch per game that is baffling, and he's going to really wish he had it back, and it's going to be a mistake pitch, and it's probably going to be punished for a home run. Miles Mikolas gives up a lot of solo home runs, which is good, because if you're giving up walks and base hits ahead of those bombs, it can really come back to haunt you. And I think in the games where that does happen, Mikolas tends to have a lesser stat line, and Cardinals have a lesser chance to win the game. But over this month of May and then this first start in June, of the and I'll go back to April too, the 8 starts in which Mikolas, as I said, has been pretty good, one really bad one, and then 7 games where he really gave the Cardinals a chance to win. All in that stretch, he's still allowed 1 home run in 6 of the 8 games. So he's still going to give up a homer, even in his good games. That's just an inevitability of his game, I think, because those breaking pitches are. And look, gave up one on the fastball today. Those breaking pitches, though, when you give them too much of the strike zone, there's nothing tricky about it. There's nothing deceptive about it. And at times it looks like he's just, out there throwing slow pitch and go hit it. is what's happened. So, like, you have those memories of Miles Mikolas in your brain because they're so frustrating to see pitches that are that non-competitive at times. But when it only happens once a game, and today twice a game, really the fastball, you got beat by a 94-mile-per-hour fastball. Diaz took it the other way. Caught too much of the zone, was too much in the middle of the plate, but it wasn't like the breaking balls that we're talking about and get frustrated by. But the slider to Cabbage was just a brutal pitch, and that happens once a game. Oli Marmol wanted to make darn sure it didn't happen a second time per game against either of those batters, because when they were coming back up again in the seventh inning, John Singleton, lefty, Diaz, righty, Cabbage, lefty, it was a no-brainer to use JoJo Romero, and I'm pretty sure that's how Oli Marmol felt based on this audio, courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest.
About Miles, just 62 pitches. What's the reason he didn't go deeper? Or
yeah, we got three guys that are really good on the back end. He's going right through the lane. At that point, it's not pitch count. It's more familiarity with the hitters that got him. And the guys that were coming up had 2 homers against him. That's JoJo's lane there with 2 lefties coming up. They don't have a righty off the bench today unless they wanted to get Bregman going again. So those guys went in order.
So there's Cardinals manager Oli Marmol explaining on the postgame show, Bally Sports Midwest, of why you take Miles Mikolas out of the game after 62 pitches. And I think it makes a lot of sense. He said, look, it's not pitch count. For those that sort of would critique Oli Marmol on certain decisions and say, well, he's just kind of doing it by the notebook and doing it by the analytics and whatever, he's not watching the game. Well, this would be an example of 62 pitches. If you just kind of go by the standard of the way games are typically managed, your starting pitcher 62 pitches in, you're more inclined to let him continue until he gets into a 80s or 90s pitch count, unless you're noticing some real struggles on the mound from him. And outside of the back-to-back homers, which had happened, another inning previous, he had a very efficient 6th inning. I think he only threw like 5 or 6 pitches to get through inning number 6. So it's not that there were any imminent signs of him suddenly hitting the wall, but in a game that was only 4-2 at the time for the Cardinals, and that ended up being the final score, as the Cardinals got their offensive production from a Nolan Arenado home run in this game. Brendan Donovan had an RBI hit. Burleson came up with an RBI knock as well. And Brandon Crawford scored a run that was driven in by Michael Ciani on a sacrifice fly. And he had a sacrifice bunt as well. Michael Ciani doing the little things at the bottom of the Cardinals order. When he had Brandon Crawford 7, Pages 8, and Ciani 9, that's been a stretch of lineup where you just look at their numbers. 162 average for Crawford, even after a double today. 050 average for Pages, who just hasn't gotten much going, though he did walk and score in this game. And then Ciani is hitting 200, so just in a 511 OPS. So just not a lot to write home about from that 7, 8, and 9 coming into the game. And yet they were able to contribute and come up with some key plays. Ciani, the sacrifice to get the Cardinals on the board, and then the bunt to move Pages up to second, which goes down as a sacrifice, but he tried to stretch it down the third base line and maybe reach on the bunt hit, and it just didn't turn into a hit. But moving the runner up, which allowed for when Brendan Donovan got his base hit, it scores Pages from second. Instead of being the station-to-station offense, the Cardinals were doing some really good small ball things. The fundamental type things that I basically said in last night's podcast that they have to do a better job of moving forward if they're going to win games at the clip that they need to. Had been seeing errors, had been seeing just a lack of fundamental baseball. I thought they were much better in that category on Wednesday, and it's part of why they were able to win a tight game. Like, I came into the Astros series saying you're going to have to win some slugfest if you're going to get it done, and they defied that in the only game they were able to win on Wednesday in the series by playing small ball and playing quality defense and just allowing the game to unfold in a way that made sense by, efficient starting pitching, and then say, look, you've got a rested bullpen in that those 3 guys that you're going to use if you're up in a 1-run or 2-run game. They've all not pitched on Tuesday, so they're all going to be available to go today. And if you're really valuing the win and wanting to lock it down, as Oli Marmol said, that's JoJo's lane in the 7th. When you're just looking at the game situation, 2 lefties out of 3, and knowing that they didn't have a righty available on the bench, because Tuesday, Alex Bregman left the game with an injury, and they're basically banking that they're not going to bring Bregman in off the bench at that point, given that he was a little bit banged up in Tuesday's game. So I think that's sort of the managing, that you're looking at the details of the game and making sure to put your team in the best possible situation to win. If there's a downstream effect of the Cardinals not having as robust of options in their bullpen for the Rockies series, well, I think you take your chances with that because the belief should be that against the Colorado Rockies, you're going to score more runs than you are against a Houston Astros pitching staff. Ronel Blanco was the pitcher today for the Astros, and we know he's got a no-hitter to his credit already this season and had a 2.4 ERA coming in. So you're sort of acknowledging that runs could be at more of a premium, and if that's a 4-2 game, and credit to Arenado for getting the Cardinals their fourth run with his solo home run. You can't leave Houston if you're Arenado without putting at least one into the Crawford boxes, even if you're struggling, as he has been. He was able to do that in the sixth inning. So that's the situation. You've got 7, 8, 9. You've got a 2-run game. You've got your best 3 relievers that all didn't pitch the day before. That's what they're there to do. Like, I know that we do talk a lot about you don't want to overuse these guys. You don't want to burn them out so that they're not effective in July, August, and September. But on the other side of that, I also kind of think we talk about that a disproportionate amount. We talk about that fear of burning out these relievers more than we should, because their job description is to be high-leverage relievers and to pitch in the games where the Cardinals are close and tight late and they need them to get over the hump and win the game. Like, that's why they're on the team. So when those situations come up, we shouldn't necessarily bemoan it every single time those guys are out there. Ultimately, they should end up being out there 65, 68 times per year, and that's just the nature of it. Yeah, it might burn a guy out. His arm might fall off eventually. But like, that's what the role is of these relief pitchers. And if you've got good ones, you should be using them in the circumstances in which they should be used, especially if they didn't pitch the day before. And you do have a series coming up against a team that's got a 5.40 ERA as a team. The Rockies do. It's dead last in baseball in team ERA this year. So, yeah, you should be able to find one of those games, as Andy and I have been talking about on the Big Show this week. Part of the problem for the Cardinals right now, and why it feels like these relievers have been overused, is because when they're leading, it's almost a given that 1, 2, or all 3 of the triumvirate of JoJo, Kittredge, and Helsley are going to be utilized, because the Cardinals are only up by 1, 2, or 3 runs. They're never winning by a bunch of runs where you can use one of your spare guys and guys from that second tier of your bullpen that frequently, right? Like, wouldn't it be great if you have a start where if Miles Mikolas goes 6, but you're up 6-1, you just bring in a Kyle Leahy type or a Roy Croft type or, a Liberatore to throw multiple innings, and you don't even need to use any of your big guns because the game is out of reach. As long as that guy that comes in doesn't get into trouble, you end up being able to save your bullpen and winning a game. That's been kind of a foreign concept to the Cardinals this year, but that's more of a result of their offense not having enough of those games where they win in a blowout. It's hard to say, hey, you should be blowing out teams more often, because it's a hard thing in Major League Baseball to score 7 or 8 runs in a game, but teams do it all the time, and the Cardinals are among the lowest rate in baseball of having those wins by 5, 6, 7 runs where they put up a bunch of runs and they're able to coast to the finish and not have it be much of a sweat. They just haven't been doing that enough this year because their offense hasn't consistently scored runs on that level. And part of it is, I think, because when you don't have 4, 5, 6 run leads, they have a pitching staff that's built to give up 2 or 3 runs over the 6 innings that they pitch. We've talked about this going all the way back to the offseason, and Miles Mikolas is a great demonstration of it now, that even as he is giving the Cardinals chances to win, he's going to have those 6-inning, 3-run outings more often than he doesn't. It's not that it's great, and the season ERA is going to be 4.50 if you did that every single time, but it's also going to give you a chance to win every single time, but it's going to be one of those high-stress opportunities to win because it's going to be 4-3 or it's going to be 5-4 when the bullpen gives up a run, and in the 9th inning, you've got to hold it. Like, you're not winning via blowout with this Cardinal team because if you're giving up 3 runs guaranteed by the starter, and then you have to hope that the bullpen kind of rides the rail and doesn't give up any, you'd have to score 8 or 9 runs to really say, okay, now we can bring in some rando to throw the 8th and 9th and not really have to sweat what relievers we bring in because the game's basically out of reach unless things go disastrously wrong. That is an element of the game that can be hard to ask for on a given specific day, but throughout the course of a season, you should be doing that once a week or once every handful of days, whatever it ends up being, that you score enough runs to give that breather to the key bullpen arms in a game that you actually win. We know that those key arms aren't going to pitch when you lose. When you're going into the late innings down 7-4, that's not; those guys aren't going to be destined for that spot. That's and look, you say, well, why aren't they bringing in the good relievers and they're only down by a couple runs? They have to have certain lanes for certain players so that they don't burn them out. But when the lane is You're up 2, and there's 2 lefties coming up in the 7th inning, and Miles Mikolas has already gotten you 6, and then you add in the fact that the 2 of the guys that are coming up have homered off of him in the last time they faced him. I don't really care what his pitch count is. It's just a no-brainer to make the move, and Oli Marmol did, and it ended up working out. Honestly, a pretty low-stress 7th, 8th, and 9th for the Cardinals as they beat the Astros 4-2. They get enough offensive production, as we mentioned, a little bit in the category of timely hitting. They didn't have really much of that. 1 for 4 with Risp. The only hit they had with runners in scoring position was after the Ciani bunt moved Pajas to second and Donovan drove him in. But Alec Burleson had a double that scored a run from first base because he looped one into the right field corner. And then Arenado's run, home run, I should say, didn't need to have anybody on base or in scoring position for that. So the Cardinals were able to get it done. So they get the win. They're at 29-31, and they're going to be within striking distance. It's all about, though, taking advantage of this Rockies team. Their pitching is terrible. I mean, just downright awful. 5.40 ERA is almost a half run higher than the next worst team ERA in baseball, which is the White Sox at 4.94, and then the Marlins are 4.64. They're almost a full run worse than the Marlins, which is the 28th team in baseball in ERA. There's only 2 spots differential, and it's close to a full run. Now, that being said, Thursday, Cal Quantrill is one of their more capable starters. He's got a 3.84 ERA, and that's who's going to be on the mound for Colorado taking on Sonny Gray. Austin Gomber has actually pitched pretty well for Colorado in this season. 3.06 ERA, the former Cardinal, will go on Friday. And then Feltner has a 6.22 ERA on Saturday against Kyle Gibson, and Ty Block is going on Sunday, a 4.5 ERA. So really, some of those ERAs not too terrible, but I'm going to venture to guess that when I pull up the splits here for MLB.com or from MLB.com, and I sort it to not just be their overall ERA, but specifically take a look at the ERA from the relief pitchers for Colorado, I'm going to bet they are last place in baseball by a mile. And that is the case. 5.24 ERA from the relief pitchers, which is weird. Like, that's still last in baseball. But their starter ERA, they must be cycling some guys in and out that are doing a little bit better, I guess, now than what they had been. Because overall, they're a 5.51 starter ERA on the season. But I just rattle off 3 guys who are decent enough. But then Feltner is one. Like Gibson versus Feltner on Saturday. If you don't win that game and you're the Cardinals, I don't know what you're something's wrong. And Palante is going to go on Sunday. That's going to be, a test for sure because he's had one good outing and one really, really bad one. But I like the way the pitching sets up for the Cardinals. Lynn versus Gomber on Friday will be interesting to see how the lefty Austin Gomber performs. Cardinals have not hit lefties as well as you'd think they should, but that's because the guys that usually crush lefties are guys like Goldie and Arenado, and they haven't had good seasons. But Sonny Gray versus Quantrill on Thursday, like that should be Sonny Gray lean, even though he's kind of been a little bit more human of late rather than the superhuman that he was right after he came off of the injured list back in April. And so I think you look at 3 of the 4 games should be a very attainable mark here as the Cardinals line up Gray, Lynn, Gibson, and even though it is Palante, I think that's a game Sunday that Cardinals should be able to get to Ty Block and find a way to win this series 3 out of 4. That should be the expectation to me. And you get some lefties that you face, Gomber, Block. We'll see what the Cardinals are able to do, and maybe it could be a big series for guys like Goldie and Arenado that you get to have some lefties opposing you, and historically that's been good throughout their careers. Maybe not this year. They've just been struggling regardless. I think Arenado maybe just the 1 homer off of a lefty out of the 5 that he's hit so far. But let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are about the Cardinals win over Houston. Are you satisfied by 4-5 on the road trip, or is it more of a feeling like Andy and I had said on the Big Show, which I'll play some of that audio and put that on the YouTube channel for you guys at some point during the day on Thursday. But is it more of a tolerable feeling? You'll tolerate it as long as what's to come against these next 2 teams is actually putting the pedal to the metal and getting it done and making it happen. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on that. Before we get out of here, we'll play a little bit of audio from Brenden Crawford, courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, because he went 1 for 4 with a double and a run, starting for Mason Wynn on Wednesday. Wynn, again, they said he's out with the back. Not an injury, but they're managing the back tightness and the stiffness and the discomfort that he's had throughout the year. Might have tweaked it a little bit in the previous days, and so it made sense to give him the day game after the night game. They're managing it consistently. I think, and I hope we are well past the point, though, of Cardinals fans complaining about Mason Wynn sitting out. Like, it's well known the reason at this point, so don't bitch and complain about it. It's just what it is. He's dealing with the back. Ideally, it's something that is not going to affect him throughout his whole career, but backs can be tricky, and it's one of those where if you have a setback with it, it could cost you a stint on the injured list, and that would be an everyday Brandon Crawford situation, so I don't think people are necessarily angling to see that happen. So understand that they are going to continue to manage it with Mason Wynn to try to get the most out of him and make sure that they have him for the long run in 2024. But I wanted to play a little bit of audio from Brandon Crawford because his last couple of games, it's been going better. Remember, he had the 2-for-2 with the home run and the hit and the last time that he started, and then today he comes up with an extra base hit and scores a run after hitting the double and reaching base there. So he had some nice positive thoughts in the clubhouse after the game. I'll play a little bit of his audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest.
You played a big part in getting you guys going early. You don't get a ton of starts, but when you have, you contribute. How much does that mean to you when you're in there to make something happen?
A lot. I didn't feel like I did a whole lot in April, so to be able to come in and contribute is definitely a big deal for me, and just trying to stay ready when I get an opportunity.
So there's Brandon Crawford, Cardinals infielder, Cardinals shortstop, on getting a chance to come in and contribute and actually, perform well, because he knows that April was not a good month for him. And was it just the shortened spring training because he signed during the middle of camp and it took him that long to kind of get ramped up as a veteran player who's used to having his routine and had that obviously broken because he was not signed to begin spring? Whatever it is, I do think you're getting a little bit more production for Brandon Crawford. I don't know if we need to go too crazy saying that he's going to be back to his career norms offensively or even defensively. But it was nice to see Brandon Crawford in the start be able to once again add to the win rather than, sort of what we had seen from him for the month of April and really most of May. Just things not really going too well. So that's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Again, I'll tag it. Make sure to hit follow on Spotify if you listen to B-Shape Daily at all over there. Would love to get my follower count up a little bit on Spotify. But subscribe here if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy the content daily throughout the season and the off season. B-Shape Daily is where you can keep it right here because we're going to have Cardinals coverage every dang day. So thank you guys so much for listening. That'll do it for this edition of the show, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Shape Daily. Peace.